Hi, welcome back once again to CBSE Board Economics. My name is Saddam Hussain. I welcome you all once again. Today we are discussing about indifference curve. What exactly is an indifference curve? And let's see some of its properties. That's a very important concept in microeconomics. Last time you remember indifference schedule we discussed. Please watch that video if you have not watched it to get a proper understanding of the subject. Let's see what is an indifference curve. An indifference curve is a graphic representation of an indifference schedule. An indifference curve is a graphic representation of an indifference schedule. What does an indifference curve shows? An indifference curve shows different combination of two commodities that gives the consumer equal level of satisfaction. A, B, C, D or different combinations a consumer can have, they all give him equal satisfaction. Whether the consumer has 1 unit of good X and 8 units of good Y, or whether the consumer has 4 units of good Y and 2 units of good X, or 3 units of good X and 2 units of good Y, or the consumer has 4 units of good X and 1 unit of good Y. So what it means, when you decrease one commodity, then you can increase the other commodity. When you are increasing good X, you have to decrease good Y. We discussed already because of two reasons. Number one is the consumer is constrained by his income. When he is buying more of good X, he has to sacrifice good Y because he has limited income. He is spending more on good X and less on good Y. That means he is getting less units of good Y. They all give him same level of satisfaction. And if he is not sacrificing good Y, then his level of satisfaction from B, C, D will increase. That is contrary to the assumption of an indifference curve. To understand in a better fashion, please look at the graph here. One, look at the graph carefully. On the x-axis, we got good X. On the y-axis, you have good Y. Carefully follow this. On y-axis, you have good Y. Okay, look at this one. This indifference curve is downward sloping from left to right, from top to bottom. It's downward sloping. Why it is downward sloping? Any downward sloping curve shows if you consume more of good X, you have to sacrifice good Y. So you can see in the graph here, as the consumer is consuming 1, 2, 3, 4, increase the consumption of good X, he sacrifices the consumption of good Y. So that's why it's downward sloping. This is the first property of an indifference curve. Look at the graph carefully to understand more. Look at this at point A. The consumer is having 8 units of good Y and 1 unit of good X. That is giving him some level of satisfaction. We don't know how much. So he's buying 8 units of good Y and 1 unit of good X. He's getting some satisfaction. Now come down to point B on the indifference curve. That means the consumer is able to buy more of good X. From 1 to 2 it has gone up by sacrificing good Y from 8 to 4. 8 to 4. That means he sacrificed 4 units of good Y in order to get 1 more unit of good X. Mind it, the satisfaction the consumer is getting from this combination is also same as getting from good A. Now, as is getting from possibility or combination A. Now let's go slide down the indifference curve at point C. At point C, the consumer has sacrificed, look at the graph carefully, from 4 to 2. He sacrificed 2 units of Y in order to obtain 1 more unit of good X. Now if you further slide down from C to D, he sacrificed 1 unit of good Y to get 1 more unit of good X. So this clearly shows when he's consuming more of good X, he's sacrificing good Y. But mind it here, the rate of sacrifice is not same, not constant at all possibilities. Look at the first one, when he's moving from A to B, the rate of sacrifice is 4. He given up 4 of good Y to get 1 unit of good X. That is delta Y, you can see AE, it's a big AE. Delta Y, delta X, see it here, EB. So the formula is delta Y upon delta X, AE upon EB, that is 4 upon 1, that is equal to 4. When he moves from B to C, the rate of sacrifice has slightly come down. It has come down from 4 to 2 now. Look at this one, delta Y upon delta X, BF upon FC. Look at the graph carefully, 2 upon 1, that is equal to 2. When he slides down from C to D, the last combination, he gave up 1 unit of Y in order to get 1 more unit of X. We discussed already, if you ask me, so why he is decreasing less and less of good Y to obtain 1 unit of good X. This is because of law of diminishing marginal utility. As the consumer goes on consuming more and more unit of good X, his satisfaction from good X is declining, hence he is willing to sacrifice less and less of good Y. Okay, and from this we understand one more point. An indifference curve is convex to the origin. Why it is convex to the origin? Because of decreasing MRS. MRS already you know, it's the rate of sacrifice of one commodity in order to obtain 1 more unit of the other commodity. The first property is an indifference curve is sloping downwards, and the second property is an indifference curve is convex to the origin, not concave. It is because of decreasing MRS. Okay, you got the other point. Next, one more point from this we conclude here. An indifference curve never touches the x-axis. Why it never touches the x-axis? Because our assumption is the consumer needs to have a combination of both the commodities. If it's touching the x-axis, that means the consumer is having only good X and none of good Y. And second, next point, an indifference curve never touches the y-axis. If it's touching the y-axis, that means the consumer is buying only good Y and none of good X commodity, which is contrary to the assumption of indifference analysis. Indifference analysis clearly states that the consumer should have a combination of any commodities. Next point, or the next characteristics of an indifference curve is an indifference curve can never be parallel to x-axis. Why it can never be parallel to x-axis? If it is parallel to x-axis, then the consumer is buying more and more of good X without sacrificing good Y, which is not possible. An indifference curve can never be parallel to y-axis. Why it is can never be parallel to y-axis? Because why it can't be parallel to y-axis? Because the consumer is buying more and more of good Y without sacrificing good X, which is also not possible. So from this we conclude that indifference curve has to be downward sloping convex curve. So please follow here. Once again we read out the entire thing which you just seen it here. Follow it here. Explain an indifference curve. An indifference curve is the diagrammatic representation of the indifference schedule. An indifference curve is the locus of different combination of two goods that gives the consumer equal satisfaction. The consumer is indifferent in choosing any one of these combinations. Here we assume the consumer consumes only two goods, good X and good Y. ABCD is the indifference curve as the locus of combinations A, B, C and D which give the consumer equal satisfaction. An indifference curve has two important characteristics. One, an indifference curve is always slopes downwards from left to right. In other words, it is negatively sloped. It is because when the consumer increases consumption of good X, he must reduce consumption of good Y to maintain the same satisfaction from all combination of good X and good Y. And he is constrained by his income, I told you already. The next point is an indifference curve neither touches the x-axis nor y-axis because the consumer has to consume some quantity of good X and good Y each. If the IC touches the x-axis, it means the consumer is consuming only good X, which is against the assumption of two goods. Third point, an indifference curve is convex towards the origin because of the law of decreasing marginal rate of substitution. The slope of an indifference curve is nothing but MRS. Keep that in mind. The slope of indifference curve is nothing but MRS. For example, when consumer moves from combination A to B downward, he is willing to give up 4y, that is AE. Look at the graph carefully. To B downwards, he is willing to sacrifice 4y, that is AE, to obtain 1x EB. That's equal to EB. The slope between A and B is then slope between A to B is delta y upon delta x. AE upon EB, 4 upon 1, that is equal to 4. Slope between B to C is BF upon FC, that is equal to 2 upon 1, that is equal to 2. Slope between C and D is CG upon GD, 1 upon 1, that is equal to 1. The slope declines as we move downwards along the curve. This gives convex shape to the indifference curve. The slope of the indifference curve is nothing but MRS XY. So you understood it. That's all we have time for this video. I'm sure you must have got it. The notes which is flashing in the video, please copy in your notebook and try to learn it. In case of any doubts, write it in the comment box. So I'm sure we'll explain you. So go through this with the table, indifference table. I'm sure you understand. So till we meet next time, it's goodbye from Saddam Hussein. Don't forget to share, subscribe, like and comment on our videos. That's it. Goodbye, guys.